Thanks, Holly. Hi, everyone. My name is Regina Yaski. I am a PEM physician at Rainbow Babies and Children. And well, I wouldn't say I'm a subject matter expert, but I am an expert and I work with Region 5 for Kids. Today, I'm going to be talking about information sharing, security concerns, and legal considerations. And those kind of all go together. And this is the third module in the series. Next slide, please. Okay. So we know that disasters can be chaotic. We know they can be stress-inducing. So when it comes to information sharing, we want to make sure that families and the staff, they have like clear, concise, regular updates of the incidents. And we want to definitely minimize the psychological and security concerns happening inside and outside the hospital, and then also to deal with legal challenges as well. So this is basically what this module will be discussing. Some of them we don't have clear answers to everything, but it's basically stuff that you should be thinking about when developing and instituting your reunification plan for your institution. Okay. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about information sharing. So lack of timely information to the public in disaster, that can, thanks, Holly, that can lead to chaotic circumstances. You can see increased crowds, obviously, because people are nervous, they're anxious, they don't know what's going on. Increased call volume if something is going on outside. There's an MCI, active shooter terrorist event, and we're told people are going to the hospital. What's going to happen? It's going to be an increased call volume to the hospital, right? Everyone is anxious. They're seeking their loved ones. They want to know where they are. They want to know what happened to them. So it's definitely chaotic. First thing hospitals should do, and this is all like pre-planning. You don't want to wait till something happens before you do this, but you should establish close partnerships with other key response organizations so that your messaging efforts, like I always use to see, they're consistent and coordinated. So examples would be your emergency management team should be a force right there in your hospital. Public health institutions, American Red Cross is also a good one, and then working closely with your law enforcement, whether in the hospital and outside the hospital as well. And I'll get a little into that. Next slide, please. So some of the considerations for information sharing, some of the things that you should be thinking about when instituting this, information that you can share with the community ahead of time. So what can you share with them? So that's one of the things to think about. And how and what kinds of critical information can you share when you're looking at, you have to consider HIPAA, of course, and that also comes into the legal considerations, always considering HIPAA, with the laws, the regulations, the policies. What can you share with the public? And how to rapidly implement communication processes. Some hospitals, even some schools now have like pre-scripted messaging where they already have the information and then they will just kind of like add in the blurbs depending on the situation. So you can have pre-scripted messaging already set for your hospital or your institution. So if something does happen, it would kind of expedite things in the system and with the communication. The next one, how the emergency management and public health communities, how will you communicate with them and how will you do your public messaging with the hospitals and how you would do your public messaging with them, and how you want to inform your staff regarding what they can and cannot share. Because if something happens, your hospital staff is going to have a lot of questions, right? They want to know what's going on, what is happening. People are going to be calling. You have to inform them and kind of let them know, this is what you can tell families. This is what you can't share for now. You have to give us time before you can do this or do that. And then how to best establish good relationships with local news agencies. A lot of institutions may have one or two local news agencies that they work with, that they have a close relationship with, that they trust, that they verified, working with. So that's another thing to think about. These are all things to think about with information sharing. Next slide, please. Okay, you want to have timely, accurate information to the public. That's important because everyone is going to be anxious. In real life, this is difficult, I understand. So when I'm saying timely, I'm not saying you're giving out the information immediately, because you also want your information to be accurate, right? But people are going to be on pins and needles. They want to know what's going on. So this is why pre-planning is always important, because when something like this happens, you have your incident command system, you have your PIO, your public information officer, you have everyone ready so you can actually inform the public in a timely manner. And then you want to ensure that the hospital gathers and disseminates the best possible internally and externally available. You want it to be credible and verified. That's important. You want your information to be credible and verified when you're speaking to these families, because the last thing you need is disinformation or giving different information to different families. That just ensues chaos. And you have to make sure that your family and staff get regular updates on what's going on. You can do every 30 minutes, you can do every hour, every 2 hours. Just make sure that they're getting regular updates on what's going on. Okay. So much of the coordinated communication should be determined as part of, your disaster planning and preparation. And this is all while you're verifying your media sources, because that's something that you have to do as well. I took this from a paper that was really important. It says every comprehensive, and this goes too with the legal, it says every comprehensive reunification plan should have procedures that govern the sharing of relevant information with other hospitals, public health agencies, and other partners involved in the response as legally permitted to facilitate family reunification. And I'll get a little bit more into that. But every comprehensive reunification plan, you should have procedures in place where you can actually share information, because you're going to need the public's help and your partners as well, your municipal partners. So you have to have procedures in place for that. Next slide, please. So in the hospital, you want to designate key areas, because when family members come, you want to be able to tell them, okay, this is where you will go to ask for information about your loved one, to see if your family member is here. And some of the examples are the information desk, the ED reception area, and the hospital operator. It helps if you have also a script in place for these people, and you also have a list of names of patients in the hospital to kind of help them, and to help them when family members come to them and ask them, questions. You want information sharing. You definitely want your media support, data entry, putting everything in computer, and collaboration with outside agencies. So social services, your law enforcement, your National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I mean, we saw that with Katrina after so many kids were lost, thousands of kids, and they played a huge part. American Red Cross is another too. And you want to do that through internal communications and coordinating centers. You want to ensure that, like I said, the families have regular updates of the status and the hospital response and what the hospital is doing. Okay. Credible and verified information is key, definitely. Maintain consistency and to these family members who are seeking information. And you want to give them the correct information, whether they're calling you on the phone or they're showing up in person. You always want to just give them the correct information and the consistent information. The family reunification program director is the one who's responsible for distributing the list of patients, and you want to have them distribute the list to the staff at regular intervals. And the staff should also be notified of the next update. Okay. You want to include contact information for available just reunification resources in the community to kind of aid family members with the reunification process as a whole. And I'll get a little bit into that as well. Next slide, please. So this is your incident command system. I already said you want to maintain your consistency with messaging. Something like this happens, you have a major disaster, whether it's an MCI, terrorist event, active shooter event, you want to activate your ICS. And your public information officer is right there, as well as your safety officer, your liaison officer. But your public information officer, that's the person who is responsible for giving a unified message to the public. That's their job, that's their role, and that's what they do. right there, okay? So if you break down your ICS, you have your operations, planning, logistics, finance, and under your operations section, I always think of the operations section as the people who do stuff. You have your family reunification branch, and under your family reunification branch is where you have the family reunification branch officer, who is the person I talked about, who collects the list of names, giving updates to the hospital, like what are the next steps and things like that. But the PIO is the one who is responsible for sending the message out to the public. Next slide. Okay, like I said, you want to have designated key areas of information collection as well, and sharing with the hospital. So some of these areas are the Hospital Family Reunification Center. Dr. LaForte gave a great presentation for Module 2, and she talked about some of these areas. The HFRC is the area where you would have family members wait to be reunited with their children. You want to have media away from these areas, but you also want to have law enforcement there. And this is where they can actually get information about their loved ones. The patient/pediatric safe area is another one. This is where you would have your unaccompanied minors who've been medically cleared. That's another area where you could do some information collection. You can get some information from the children, and also get information from family members when they're allowed to see the kids. Information desk, like I talked about, you can set up a family reunification websites, and those are helpful as well. Those take some time to come up, so they're not as timely, but that's also another possibility. And then the ED, of course, like the ED reception desk. And these are there, like I said, to ensure proper oversight and communication to these family members. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's a question. What if a family member cannot be definitively told that their relative is not present in the hospital? If they come in and they're like, we can't find your family members, you would direct them, like I said from my last slide, to the HFRC to kind of wait, because the HFRC, remember, they're collecting information there as well. And there you can give them the resources. So one of the pre-planning things that you have to do is to collect your municipal resources, like your reunification resources. If available, have those available for family members in all your communication to the public as well, so that they have that when they're looking for their loved one. Okay, so social media, so fun, a blessing and a curse, definitely a blessing and a curse. Difficult to monitor. A lot of times when we have disasters, you'll see bystander information is the first information we see out there before we even hear from the hospitals, before we even hear from EMS at the scene, nothing else. It's social media. Everything is posted onto social media. So it's definitely difficult to control. And then you have rumors out there that are just rampant. In the hospital setting and just outside the hospital setting, we always urge patients and family members to refrain from disseminating information that concerns the kids, concerns anything that has to do with the hospital or what's going on in the hospital. And then we also plead with family members to notify the staff if they are seeing incorrect information or inappropriate information on social media or something that's going on in the hospital. We always ask them to just kind of notify the staff of that. Next slide. Okay. At the same time, as you were speaking with family members, also remember to instruct your hospital staff early on that, they should look for any inaccurate information or any inappropriate posts on social media. They should also monitor the kids, because in these cases, you will have adolescents who have tablets. They have phones, they have access to social media. So making sure that they're not posting pictures from inside the hospital or videos or posting inappropriate things that they shouldn't be posting within the hospital setting. You want to coordinate with your hospital PIO to respond to any social media reports that you consider like inappropriate or concerning to the public, and you feel like they should give a response. You want to work with them in order for them to do so. Communication templates are helpful. There are not many of them out there, but they may help to guide both parents and family members with appropriate sharing of information with the public. 1 minute break. Any questions for information sharing?
feel free to unmute, throw them in the Zoom chat, or there's also a Q&A function within Mentimeter, so we can utilize that as well. But I'll give it another 30 seconds, give people to type out their thoughts, and then we can move on. Looks like we did get one question. What info is it okay to share on SoMe?
SoMe. I'm not familiar with SoMe.
Social media.
Oh, social media. I'm sorry. I don't know the lingo terms. So what information is, I think if you are in a hospital setting, I would probably check with one of the administrators before posting anything, because you want to make sure that you're posting accurate information and that the hospital is okay with it, if that makes sense. So I would honestly check first before I post anything on social media. Looking at the research that I did, the American Red Cross obviously is not social media, but those are kind of like the places where they encourage, families to put up, pictures of their loved ones, or if they have any questions, but it's actually frowned upon to post, pictures and information about the child on social media. Now, Facebook actually has a page that has to do with reunification, that you can post information like, pictures of the child, and ways to like identify and locate the child, but it's also institution specific, and I would think it's up to the family as well. But it's not always encouraged, if that makes sense. And if you do work for the hospital and you want to know what information is okay to share on social media, I would speak first with like your PIO, or have someone speak with your PIO. The other thing too would be to speak with your legal department and risk management to just make sure you're doing the right thing and you're going about it the right way.
Thank you so
Because
much.
it's up to the hospital to actually put that information out there. It's their responsibility to give out accurate information. It's really not us posting information out there as, just workers in the hospital, if that makes sense. I would make sure you get approval to do that. And on the platform, depending on the platform. Like I said, Facebook is one that they've used before in the past, but those are more for like national incidents. But I would just caution doing that. American Red Cross is one. That's, of course, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is another one. Those are two that are, verified and people trust them. So I would use those.
Thank you so much. If there's no other questions, we can move on.
Security concerns. Next slide, please. We'll talk about a little bit about security concerns. Like you said before, disasters can be chaotic. Definitely, we need heightened security always, and especially like depending on the situation, whether it's an MCI, terrorist event, active shooter, a lot of people, the crowd, it's chaotic. So in cases like this, security leadership should be involved very early on. And like I talked about in the incident command system, this is where the safety officer comes into the picture. So you definitely want to have a safety officer in your ICS and ready to go. Dr. LaForde also talked about this at her last module, during her last module. You want to have security officers present in your pediatric safe area, your PSA, the ED, the hospital family reunification center and the information desks, because this is where you're going to have a high volume of people going to get information. You're also going to have a high volume of people there as well. So you want to have security there, and you definitely want to have someone there protecting, the kids and the hospital workers as well, the hospital staff. Next one. And there you go. And there's your ICS, and that's your safety officers who's responsible for all matters that have to do with safety, including the health and safety of the patients and the hospital personnel. So some of the roles and responsibilities of security, in addition to providing, safety, they also make sure that background checks are done. So the biggest thing with kids, especially unaccompanied minors or just kids who are there, you want to make sure that they are with the custodial parent, or they are being discharged with a legal guardian or custodial parent. So they confirm that background checks are done, fingerprints are collected if they have to, and for all kids who have, all people, who have access to unaccompanied minors, especially like in the pediatric safe area. This is why for reunifications, schools are a good way to go, and school teachers are a good way to go to come in and watch these kids, because they've already had background checks done, they've had fingerprints collected, so that's a good way to go. But if not, then this is where you have your security come in to do that. They also work and serve as an interface with outside law enforcement, because sometimes it's too much for the hospital security to handle. So outside law enforcement and law enforcement in the community, or even national law enforcement like the FBI, they can serve as an interface to work when additional security is needed. They also work with child welfare agencies to make sure that the kids are safe, and when they're in temporary or supportive care as well, if you have to place them in a foster home or something, you work with them, and they're responsible also to work closely with these agencies to investigate if a crime has occurred or potentially occurred against these kids. They work with state law enforcement and NEMIC on reunification issues as well. So these are their roles and responsibilities. Any questions?
Give it another 30 seconds and then we can move on.
I think the biggest role for security really is serving as an interface with the community law enforcement, because you definitely need that additional help to kind of make sure that everything is secure and going as it should.
Okie doke, we can move on then.
And then the last part of this is the legal considerations. So some of the reasons why, like I mentioned earlier, in cases of a disaster, or even with pre-planning, you definitely want to get your legal team, your risk management team, you want to consult them early. So it depends, all depends on the state and the locality. There are different rules, so there's nothing that's not one answer fits all, and that's why this is so difficult. So that's why you want to get your legal counsel involved, you want to get risk management involved to see what's acceptable, what's legal, for lack of a better term, what you can and cannot do. Because these kids, like I said, are placed in vulnerable positions. Some of them are unaccompanied, they don't have a guardian present, and that puts them at additional risk. So you want to make sure that they are discharged with the appropriate person, or, when there's not a consenting adult or guardian involved. You want to implement standardized guidance to verify the identity and custody rights of adults seeking release of the child. And this is where you work with your law enforcement to do that. And you want to make sure that the proper legal procedures are always followed to keep the child safety in mind. Because even in disasters, remember, you have to think of the child's safety as well. It's important. And you have to look at the legal considerations as well. You can't just send a child home or send them to another facility because it's a disaster and you have a lot of kids on your hands. Okay. We all know HIPAA, the HIPAA Act of 1966. So I put this in there because this is important to know that healthcare professionals, providers, we actually can share patient information when it's necessary to identify, locate, and notify family members or anyone responsible for the individual's care, guardian, or death. So you can, if you get permission, if you get verbal permission from an individual when possible, if the individual is incapacitated or unavailable or not available, you can still share that patient's information if you think it's in their best interest. Like we see cases all the time of missing kids or American Red Cross. You can actually share that information with them if you think it's in the patient's best interest. Try to get consent when available, try to get permission when available. But if you can't and you feel like it's in the patient's best interest, you're actually covered by HIPAA to do so. And I just explained that. So like, if it's necessary, you can notify the media, you can notify law enforcement, you can go to the public at large pleading, and we've seen that all the time. You're needing to locate, you're needing to locate the children. You can do that, one or more children. Yes, you can do so. Okay. You want to connect with social services and law enforcement, like I said, to see what protocols they follow. And this also varies by state and locality. And you can share information also with disaster relief organizations. Like I said, example, like the American Red Cross. They're actually authorized by law. The other one is National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're actually authorized by law by their charters to assist in disaster relief efforts. So you can actually share the child's information with them, okay? So, and parental or patient permission is not needed to do so. Any questions?
Any questions for legal considerations or the rest of the module? As this is the last slide for content, I'll leave this up for questions for a little bit, for a couple more seconds. And then if you could stick around, we have a few more interactivity things that we'd like from you, and then we can let you on your way, okay? Okay, feel free to use the Q&A function, throw it in the Zoom chat, unmute yourself if you have any questions. But here's what to look forward to. So as you are aware, this is module 3. We have 2 more modules coming up in April and May, and those are reunification plan activation, and then module 5 is recovery. So what to do after a large-scale pediatric disaster event. So this, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we're offering MOC Part 4 credit for participation within these educational modules. Pretty simple, attend asynchronously or attend these virtual meetings to watch the educational module series, complete a post-reunification survey after the series has ended, and then submit a draft updated reunification plan or a list of planned reunification changes that you are looking forward to. Okay, and last thing, if you could use Mentimeter, we just kind of want to see and gauge how this presentation went, if you thought the speaker was knowledgeable, the flow of the presentation, and if it met your expectations or not. I'll give people a few moments to answer that. And as people are filling this out, feel free to ask some questions in the chat, unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you.
I actually have one, and I know I'm presenting. I'm the presenter. And I don't know if everyone knows what their institution does, but when it comes to reuniting kids with their with their family members or guardian, what if there isn't a family member there, or there isn't a guardian there, and law enforcement can't find someone that, you know, the kid can be discharged home with? Do they stay in the hospital? Does your hospital have a plan on where these kids can go? Do they go into, into the social services system? Like, what do you do?
So for Children's Wisconsin,
Mhm.
I know that we, depending on time of day and what is happening, sometimes social services, they just can't send someone right away, so they can stay in the hospital with a security officer until they come. But for most cases, they would be put into the social services custody, whether within the larger Children's Wisconsin system, or if it was Child Protective Services.
Okay. So for us, we board for 48 hours, something similar, and we board 48 hours, and then they go into Child Protective Services as well. Somebody wrote, Nita wrote something.
So do we really know that they go into Child Protective Services? Have we ever really tested that?
Well, that's why I'm asking, because our social workers take over in that situation. Our social workers and law enforcement take over at my institution. They took over after that. But that's a good question.
When we had the Asiana crash, airline crash, the hospital assumed custody of all of the pediatric victims. Some of them were patients, some of them were not, and we co-located them within a unit within our hospital. At that time, we were able to do that. And we actually maintained custody until customs would be available, like their legal guardians or their teachers were able to take them back. So we kept those patients, but I think it was mainly because they were international and didn't really have a custodial person to release them to for a while. And I think that was probably just a one-off case in terms of having like multiple patients at the same time. But that's how we managed it for that particular incident.
And this was less than 24 hours?
No, it was longer.
Well, thank you everyone for answering the questions on Mentimeter. As for funding sources, this is being funded through the ASPR with Region 5 for Kids, and it's also a collaboration with the Pediatric Pandemic Network. And here is our social media, where to reach us, where to find out. If you have any burning questions that pop up after this meeting, feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Yafsky or anyone really involved in setting up these educational module series. But if no one has any other questions, you are free to go. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope to see you for module 3, 4, and 5. Thank you.
Thank you.